Today we're going to have a deep dive into the corporate PPA and look at a bit of an insight into the reasons behind and the workings of a corporate PPA. I may use the abbreviation CPPA throughout this webinar, as corporate PPA can become a bit of a mouthful. So firstly, we're going to take a look at what a corporate PPA is. Then we'll have a look at why it's important at the moment. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time on how it works, so the mechanics, the fundamentals, and what Smartest has learned so far. So what is a corporate PPA? Well, it's an agreement between a business and a generator for the direct purchase of power from that project. This is not to say that the physical power generated can be transported to a consumer's location. Rather, this is a contractual arrangement to enable the end consumer to claim, say, or prove they are buying from a specific source, and typically that the source wouldn't exist without the agreement. So why are CPPAs of such importance now? The movement of policy and culture is driving it that way. We've got the Paris Agreement to limit an increase in global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, and the UK commitment to reaching net zero by 2050. But how is this to be achieved when low carbon subsidies have been removed over the past few years, for instance, renewable obligation and feed-in tariff, whilst remaining subsidy support is only really for large-scale projects through the CFD. As a result of the policy landscape, innovative solutions are needed to enable the quadrupling of renewable generation required to meet the UK's 2050 target. This is where the CPPA comes in, as the benefit of helping to meet emissions targets and enabling the deployment of projects which otherwise wouldn't have been built. So from an overarching perspective, the need for decarbonisation fundamentally has created conditions for the CPPA to come about. But when considering it as a business, there are three main areas which potential CPPA users are considering. Firstly, sustainability. Companies are now taking the lead on decarbonising their operations and setting themselves targets. We've got Nestle for 2050. Microsoft and Amazon want to be net positive by 2030. This isn't just altruism being played out. Customer bases are becoming more sustainably minded and buying decisions are changing. Next, we need to look at supply chains. Being a supplier to some companies now involves sustainability targets and achievements, with some even making it a requirement on contracting to have a proportion of volume from corporate PPAs or on-site generation. Tesco, for instance, expect their own supply chain to be 20% supplied by PPAs moving forwards. Finally, risk strategy. In its simplest form, a CPPA is a fancy hedge. It can form part of a company's risk strategy, locking in price certainty over a specified length of time, typically further out than the liquid market. An important thing to remember here is that this may not be three separate drivers for three separate companies. It's more likely to be a mix, whether that's a mix for a whole team or a team of individuals who have focus on specific areas within these drivers. A corporate PPA can tick all of these boxes, and in most cases, it needs to get off the line. Smartest has found a number of ways to make the process easier. Firstly, by using existing relationships, a range of consumers and generators can easily be found potential matches. This is either by using your supplier, your consultant to find a suitable partner, or indeed working with an already established partner. In the same vein, corporate PPAs can be added onto existing contracts. There's not necessarily a need to tear up your current one and start again. We've found making CPPA something that can plug and play into flexible supply and flexible PPA contracts removes complexity and adds flexibility for all parties. And by working with a supplier that already has the documentation and processes already developed, legal costs can also be reliable. So, onto the mechanics. This diagram gives you the contractual structures. We have two standard contracts, flexible supply and flexible PPA contracts. These are then underpinned by the corporate PPA framework agreement that governs the CPPA. That's the tripartite contracts that all parties sign. I may refer to the Corporate Power Purchase Framework Agreement as the framework agreement here, just for the sense of ease. Under the framework agreement, the agreed term, the agreed volume including REGOs, and the agreed commodity price is decided upon between the generator and the customer. This is the corporate transfer. The framework agreement is signed by all three parties, with Smartest facilitating the corporate transfer. And the framework governs the liabilities between the generator and the customer, including interim disruption in the contract chain, other disruption events, credit support, change of control, and termination events. This includes termination events linked to construction risk before the generation site is online. The framework will include supplements to the separate flexible PPA and the flexible supply contracts. This is to execute the corporate transfer as a lock in each contract for the pre-agreed volume of power set out. So effectively, ensuring the volume is sleeved into the corporate's position and into the generator's position. Next, let's have a look at the flexible supply contract. So it's a baseload style supply contract, purchase of power and REGOs by the customer from SmartestEnergy. Corporate transfer is treated by Smartest as a baseload lock, and the customer is able to lock and unlock any residual volume by month, quarter, and seasons, with a sleeving mechanism included. The supply contract also survives the corporate transfer following any termination event of the CPPA. And there are some similarities looking between the flexible supply contract and the flexible PPA. So the PPA would be a 15 to 20-year bankable PPA available from Smartest again. A baseload style PPA would be involved, covering purchase of power and REGOs by Smartest from the generator. This is across all technologies. Again, the corporate transfer is treated by Smartest as a baseload lock, and the generator is able to lock and unlock residual volume by month, quarter, and seasons with a sleeving mechanism included. And finally, once again, the PPA survives the corporate transfer following any termination event of the CPPA. We also need to consider the supplier role in this, or in my case, the Smartest role. Smartest take the imbalanced shape of both the generator and the customer. The cost of this can be shared between the two or taken by one party. It's down to these two parties to agree how that's managed. Smartest then manage the back-to-back baseload sleeve of the agreed volume at the agreed price. And they also then manage the REGO transfer and retirement process. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail shortly. So on to the fundamentals. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the pricing mechanisms. There were a few options available to both supply and generation businesses, but in our experience, the best way forward to gain agreement is to go with a fixed price. This also helps gain buy-in from the generator's investors as well, as it provides a guaranteed level of return. So typically, we see the fixed price linked to CPI or RPI, although we have seen examples of a pure fixed price without any escalator. This does tend to cost a little more upfront, but provides the certainty some businesses are looking for. Next up is firming costs. This is the cost of taking renewable generation, typically solar or wind, and turning it into a baseload profile so it can be sleeved into a supply contract. This results in some imbalance risk within the framework, which is priced into the firming costs, and as I mentioned before, these can sit with either party or be shared. How the power is shaped would depend on technology. For instance, a solar profile converted into baseload would typically be carried out at a seasonal level, with winter and summer delivering different power volumes, whilst the shoulder months are then smeared into those seasonal profiles. This makes it easier for trading. Finally, we need to look at the green benefits. Much like a standard renewable supply contract, decarbonised power supply enables you to report zero GHG Scope 2 emissions. However, a corporate PPA provides additionality, meaning the generation site that is built off the back of the corporate PPA wouldn't have existed without the agreement. An important part of this is how the REGOs are managed. The corporate would own the REGOs, whilst the supplier would manage them on their behalf. At Smartest, we would follow our Carbon Trust certified process, retiring the REGOs to the Ofgem Renewables and CHP register on the corporate's behalf and providing a proof of certificate for that. We would ensure they're not counted in the supplier fuel mix disclosure, and then allocate the REGOs through our emissions factor model to the corporate in question. And of course, follow up with an energy label as proof. So we have some key considerations based on our experience so far. Firstly, duration. Historically, the lengthy duration required to enact a CPPA has been a stumbling block for some. Now, though, new ideas are entering the arena, such as 5+5 deals, where you can contract with a generator for the initial 5-year period and make a decision whether or not to continue after that. Previously, corporate PPAs for 10 and 15 years have been difficult for corporates to swallow, providing a major blocker to getting them done. But as market factors develop, shorter terms are becoming available. While CPPAs for 10 and 15 years are still out there, as are longer ones, there's just now more choice. So to portability, the CPPA needs to be fixed between the 3 parties for the contract period, mainly to provide the investors with the security and confidence of the return on investment. However, a corporate, as I've already alluded to, is unlikely to sign up to a 5-year supply contract, let alone a 15-year one. So a corporate PPA needs to be portable. This means that should a customer want to leave the supplier at the end of their supply contract, they can, and the corporate PPA remains intact. The supplier would then just sleeve the volume through to the new supplier. We found this to be vital in allowing corporates to progress with a corporate PPA. A corporate PPA gives you the ability to choose what kind of projects you want to buy from, whether it's renewable, local, community project, or all 3. What we're seeing, as with most technology, is that over time it's getting cheaper and cheaper. This is one of those factors driving down the minimum period generators and investors are looking for, whilst it's also having an effect on the price to get a CPPA off the ground. The days when a corporate PPA would be looking at 80 or 90 pounds a megawatt hour are mostly behind us for more standard technologies. If you're looking at more experimental or less established technologies, then the price will likely be higher. The view on full or partial offtake has developed over the past few years. Previously, we saw corporates wanting 100% of the project offtake, whereas we're now seeing corporates take a proportion instead, with the generator then looking to leave the rest of the volume to a merchant PPA. Alternatively, the generator could arrange the offtake with 2 or more corporates, although this then muddies the water on apportioning additionality and on priority should a disruption event occur. Similarly, a corporate can look to add on other corporate PPAs in future into their own position. There's also scope for a buying group or portfolio of corporates to join together to drive a corporate PPA forwards. This opens up the opportunity for businesses with smaller consumption requirements to benefit from a CPPA and support new generation in the UK. One of the factors underpinning all of these considerations so far is that a corporate PPA is not limited to 3 parties. It isn't a corporate, a generator, and a supplier. The corporate is likely to have a consultant, such as Inspired, to support and guide them through this, whilst the generator is likely to as well. Throw in potential external legal expertise, as well as the investor in the project, and we have a number of parties to get on the same page and gain agreement on factors to move forwards. And this is why a corporate PPA can be difficult to get off the ground, but also why it's important to take advantage of existing relationships, existing contracts, and to work with businesses that are already moving on these. So that brings us to a close. Hopefully I've explained the realities of a corporate PPA a bit better. You've also learned something new about the developments in the space. Just to finish by saying thanks for listening in. My contact details are on the slide if you'd like to get in touch or have any questions at all, so please don't hesitate to ask. Thanks again.